Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we start the presentation, I'm going to do some quick housekeeping on Zoom etiquette. So just a couple things. If you haven't already done so, turn your microphones off, turn your camera off. We are recording this session, so just for FOIP, we don't want any of those videos showing, unfortunately, so that we are able to share this with the greater community and students that or teachers or classes that cannot join us today at this exact time will have the opportunity. I see a lot of you have already renamed yourself. Also, feel free to drop in the chat box if you have any questions. The chat, though, is for the workshop, so it's zero tolerance. And Andrew, my colleague, is going to be monitoring that. To ask a question, feel free at the very end of Daryl or John's presentation to put up your hand. Or you can just type it in that chat box, and if you're too shy to talk, and remember, you have to take off your microphone in order to talk. So before we begin, we're going to do a land acknowledgement. In my work with Daryl Kootenay, he has highlighted that this isn't a performative act and it's about connecting with the land. Daryl did tell me that once he attended a land acknowledgement that was 2 days long, and I shared this with students that were organizing the 2021 summit. So each of those students has stepped up and they're going to have an opportunity to give a land acknowledgement at these workshops. This is an important step in reconciliation and acknowledgement of traditional treaty land and recognition for people of the territory. A land acknowledgement is about connecting to the land and honoring the intimate connection, the Indigenous people who have called this land their home for millennia. So we are going to have Lucas joining us to do that.
Hello, yes. So hello, bonjour, oki, dadanas dada, oba watesh, and bozu. Today's workshop is about a sense of place, what the Canadian Rockies means to you. We all have a strong sense of place when we relate to the Rockies. We care about these beautiful places immensely, and if we didn't, we wouldn't be hosting this summit. So that's why it's of the utmost importance that we acknowledge the land we occupy. The Canadian Rockies have been the historic and traditional territory of Indigenous people for thousands of years, and they continue to be. Through treaties across Turtle Island, or North America, Indigenous people and settlers have agreed to share the land we occupy. Throughout the long and turbulent history of this country, and even in the national parks themselves, treaties have been broken and injustices have occurred. Last year, our summit traveled to the Moberly Homestead in Jasper National Park, where a Métis family lived and hunted for decades before being forcibly evicted in the creation of the park. Our summit has an intense connection to the history of this area, the history that continues to be shaped today. And that's why it's so important that we acknowledge the land and the agreements we make, our ancestors have made, and the land that sustains us, gives us life and well-being. Today, I'm speaking to you guys from Treaty 7 territory, where the Blackfoot Confederacy of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations, as well as the Stoney Nakoda nations, Tsuut'ina Nation, the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and the settlers of Western Canada coexist and live within the land.
Thank you, Lucas. So welcome. I just want to introduce myself. First of all, my name is Mallory Kosterski. I am the Youth Engagement Coordinator. I am a born and raised Banff local, but I now live in Canmore because Banff got too busy. And I believe in the power of the Canadian Rockies landscape. When people connect to the land, they want to protect it. And so now, as the Youth Engagement Coordinator of the Biosphere, I have the opportunity to work with an organization that is empowering community leadership and action on environmental issues, specifically within youth. So that is what we're hoping to achieve with the Canadian Rockies Youth Network. So the image that you see behind me is of Mount Assiniboine. And I grew up hiking to Alpine Club of Canada huts every summer with my mom. And this trip resonated with me. I was in grade 6, so I think about 11. I went with my mom, my cousin, and her best friend, and I met a grizzly bear with a group of large German hikers. I hiked 25-pound backpack on my back and 25 kilometers. I saw a moose on the last 1 kilometer out in the Spray Lakes region. And I also went for a dip in a glacier lake. And also that view of Mount Assiniboine. Wow. They call it the Canadian Matterhorn. And since I've returned 4 times, so we all have a sense of place in the Canadian Rockies. And that's just a little bit of mine. So Besides having a geology, I've also worked for Alberta, a geology degree. I've also worked for Alberta Parks. But enough about me. We're here to talk about the Canadian Rockies. So why the Canadian Rockies? It creates a sense of place. It's a World UNESCO Heritage Site. It has snow-capped mountain ranges, boundless recreation opportunities, 4 major life-giving watersheds. And it's also a protected place with 4 contiguous national parks, 2 BC provincial parks, several Alberta provincial parks making up Kananaskis, one of the large land management systems in the world. So if you don't know what land management is, stay tuned for the next workshop. So by the end of this workshop, our hope is that you'll be inspired and connected to the Canadian Rockies landscape, and that the presenters, Daryl Kootenay and John Wilmshurst, will help you understand the intimate connection Indigenous peoples and wildlife have to the land. We want you to listen to these voices. Some of them have been silenced. This is our first workshop in a series of 4 workshops, and it's going to give you the knowledge and training to be an ambassador of the Canadian Rockies. What is an ambassador? A youth ambassador is a steward in their community, a leader in the climate change movement, a voice for wildlife, a stakeholder in land management decisions. And we also want to elevate the voices of our nearby Indigenous nations. So by the end of this workshop, we hope you'll understand why the Canadian Rockies are so special, if you didn't already know. And by the end of the workshop series, you'll have a greater understanding of the issues they're facing, the stakeholders invested, and how to take action and feel empowered to do so. So this workshop series is designed to get you stoked for the youth-led, designed, and organized Canadian Rockies Youth Summit. Feel free to give a reaction to that. So let's begin. We are going to have 2 main presentations by Daryl Kootenay and John Wilmshurst, and there's going to be an opportunity at the end for questions. So feel free to write anything down on a piece of paper or type it in the chat box as the presentation occurs. And if you want to put up your hand and unmute your mic at the end of the session, feel free to do that. But make sure you put up your hand so Andrew or Alex can see you. So Canadian Rockies, a sense of place. This is our first workshop. So in the 2019 Summit Report, youth co-founders acknowledged the importance of Indigenous knowledge and made Indigenous knowledge a pillar of the Canadian Rockies Youth Network. They stated, Indigenous groups should have more input in the management of mountain places, especially protected areas like provincial and national parks. So this first perspective in this workshop will highlight the Canadian Rockies story of the Stoney Nakoda people. That is the people of the mountains. I am honored and humbled to welcome Daryl Kootenay to share his stories, but first, an introduction. Daryl Kootenay, he's going to help us on our learning journey. He's part of the Stoney Nakoda Nation, just east of Calgary, just west of Calgary, just east of Canmore and the Bow Valley, and is part of Treaty 7 territory. Daryl has traveled globally, and he has worked with youth to develop leadership skills and cross-cultural relations. He uses his international experience and traditional knowledge to support and help young people become leaders in their lives and the community. And for 10 years, Daryl has been bringing youth into the mountains and teaching with land-based learning. Unfortunately, because of COVID, it is virtual, but the cure to disconnect is connecting with the land. He co-founded the Stoney Nakoda Youth Council and is also a member of the Biosphere Board of Directors. So Daryl is a storyteller in every sense of the word, a singer, dancer, and an artist, and we are honored to share his story and his people's connection to the Canadian Rockies. So we are going to open up Daryl's presentation, sharing the film that he created, YAMAYETHA, the Hunter, and we will start that now, Alex.
A rifle has a lot of meaning. It symbolizes survival. It symbolizes a way of life. You know, in Nakota we say ta'otha, which means provider. Yeah, Gary should be here pretty soon.
Embracing the land. It's almost the main reason we're out there. I mean, we're out there to hunt and to harvest a nice animal that, you know, can feed the family, but along with that, we're out there to connect to the land. We're stepping into this world of our Mother Earth, Makoche. The leaves, the tree, the grass,
The smell too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the wind, the rain. What does hunting mean to you, brother?
It means a lot to me, you know, especially by embracing the land, being in tune with yourself and your spirit, and you know, it's almost like a stress reliever at the same time. It's a lot of healing, and it's a lot of fun as well.
For me, it's a sacred journey. It's a sacred way of life. We're taking lives from these animals and feeding the family, the people.
It's a way of life, and you know, us as indigenous people, as Nakota people, you know, hunting was our way of providing for our families and such, and taking care of your rifle, taking care of the meat after, and
Yeah.
putting down tobacco, you know, praying over your kill,
Giving thanks.
giving thanks.
Yeah.
You know, it has a spiritual meaning too, yeah, and
Yeah.
very spiritual meaning. When we hunt together, it's not always about killing an animal, it's about visiting as brothers. You know, we're both busy people, and sometimes we visit more than we hunt, or sometimes it's just straight hunting, and I love that. You know, you kind of woke in that hunter spirit in me that I had when I was a little boy, but kind of lost sight of. And so when you're out there, when we're out there, you know, just being in tune and really having that respect and having the same kind of perspective on what we're doing out there is pretty amazing. When we're out there hunting, I'm always thinking about the craft after and what we do with all the certain parts, and, you know, making armbands, using the rawhide, you know, with the hide scraping, and using the rawhide for all sorts of things, you know, the quilling, doing parfletch work, you know, the antlers with, you know, making rawhide scrapers the traditional way, and having a gamobi, a drum from it as well.
It's pretty special to know that where it started and, you know, where it ends, right?
Yeah.
Hunting is a beautiful way of life that I will definitely pass on one day to me chiefs,
Yeah.
you know, my son and your daughter, so that they can carry on the tradition of being the family hunters.
Oh, yes.
You know, any day that we're out hunting is a good hunt, regardless of the outcome. Aho.
Okay, we all set?
You have the floor, Daryl.
Thank you. Shnesh. Amboastich Kano Mentoya Devi ne Zoom Mienin Minithni Oyade. Said good day, all my relations. I said, welcome to Zoom. And also said, I'm here in my community of the Coldwater Nation, which is the Stoney Nakoda Nation, also known as Morley. Also wanted to introduce myself in my two traditional spirit names, Tatanka Wagichi, Wacha Toganaka Itancha. Tatanka Wagichi is my name that was given to me when I was about 10 years old from my family at a powwow. It's called the initiation that a lot of us younger dancers go through at a certain age. And we do a few of those. And that name belonged to my great grandpa. And one of these photos here that you see that are black and white, there's a few photos of my great grandpa. He's present during this photo that you see right now. And that was, in the early 1800s, or late 1800s, early 1900s. And it was his name that I was given. And my other name, Wancha Toganaka Tancha, was recently given to me by my adopted family in South Dakota, Rosebud. And the name Wancha Toganaka Itancha translates to the one that leads with his heart. And our names are very special to us. And it really, when we talk about a place, a sense of place and where you're located and where you are, our names are exactly that. When we talk to the land, when we talk to the animal nation, to the plant nation, to the spirit world, to our relatives, we introduce ourselves with those names, and that's how they remember us. They, when I say Tatanga Wagichi or Wacha Toganaka Tansha, they know that language that we've been speaking for a very long time. They know English as well, but it's a new language. Our Stony Nakota language is much older, and so that history of remembering things that are naturally within the land and the mountains, remember things, especially water. And today, through science, they're starting to realize that. And my ancestors have known that for a very long time. And so our spirit names, a lot of times there's animals in them too, like mine's Dancing Buffalo. And that really kind of resembles a characteristic of yourself. And so if you're someone who's, very, very strong, like my brother in the video, his name is Gentle Grizzly. And I don't know if you sensed it in the video, but my brother has a very gentle kind of manner and posture to him. And that's where humility really comes in. But I've been one, because I'm his brother, his younger brother, who knows how to get under his skin. And I've seen him angry before. And he really does turn into a big grizzly. And so that name, Gentle Grizzly, really suits him, because he's very, very gentle. You rarely see him mad, but when you do get him mad, that grizzly side comes out. For me, Dancing Buffalo, I'm a dancer. And when I was very young, they seen that I had a dancing spirit in me. And the buffalo part to me is in our way of life as Stony people. The buffalo is a teacher, is an educator, because he taught us how to use every single piece of his body to be utilized for clothing, for food, and for shelter, for healing. And so the buffalo teaches us so many different things. And so that's why today, I'm here sharing teachings and knowledge. And so that buffalo kind of represents that side of me. And so we often say that, people that have, other names, like someone who's very, very crazy and wild, they might have the spirit animal as like a monkey or a big gorilla, or someone who likes to, go wild and crazy. But they're very special. They're all very meaningful names because they connect us to the land and who we are. A story that I'll share with you guys, especially with that film, Hunter, YAMAYETHA is how you pronounce it. And I know Mallory pretty well, and I know that name is it's hard to speak another language. So thank you, Mallory, for learning and how to speak the language. But YAMAYETHA, when I made with my brother that film, we wanted to share how important it is, not because we're hunters and that having a rifle is cool, but the opposite of that, that having a rifle is a responsibility. that responsibility to connect to the land, to not just abuse it, and connect to where you're located. Where for us, this is where we grew up, but for others, you just might have moved to the mountains recently, or maybe been around for 10 years or so. And it's really good to connect to the land. And that was what that film was about, was how we as brothers connect. And we wanted to make sure that younger people in our community and other communities can learn that as well, because that's what we need to do. And that's how we've always been as Nakota people, respecting the land and our relatives, the animals. This story that I'm going to share is about the Banff area and how the Stoney Nakoda people were able to claim our hunting rights. And it's a story that talks about how there was one warrior and a leader, and I said his name in the beginning, where I said Taotha is the name how we say provider, because Taotha actually means moose killer, moose, killing a moose. And Taotha was the name, that was his spiritual name, because he was very, very talented hunter. And in our community, if you can harvest a moose, which is the biggest animal out there that can feed not just your family, but can feed your cousins, can feed your relatives, you can feed a lot of people without having to take, 2 other lives from an elk or a deer, which don't provide as much. And so we always think in that sense. And so this story was with the Stoney Nakoda Nation and the Shuswap and the Tanaka and the Banff area in the town of Banff. And we all had a contest, because we would run into each other a lot there. And finally, one day, warriors were saying, let's have a contest. And whoever wins the contest proves that they know this land, that they know that this land very well, and that they can claim, that they've proven that. And so how they did that was they said, well, whoever can get the biggest animal and come back right here at where they all met by the train tracks will obviously win, because that's how we seen it, was that who brings the biggest animal can feed the most people. And so all of the warriors went out, and Taotha, which was a young man, kind of knew, he went out, as everyone knew Taotha was very talented. And all the warriors came back with different animals, and they were happy because they were able to bring food back to their grandparents and the grandchildren. And Taotha came and he was smiling, and he didn't have anything, and all the warriors kind of knew, like, this isn't right, because he's so talented, but yet he doesn't have anything to show for it. And so all the warriors kind of said, all right, what are you smiling about? What's going on? How come you didn't participate? And he said he did. And he pulled out of his pocket a patch of fur. And he said that this fur was from the belly of a moose. And all the warriors started laughing, and they're like, we know you're that, we know you're pretty smart, and you're stealth, and you're swift, and you're a good hunter, but to sneak up on a sleeping moose is almost near to impossible. And so he's like, all right, well, I'll show you guys. And so all the warriors went with him, and sure enough, the moose that he took that fur from was still laying there, and you can see on his belly a little bald spot. And I share this story because as hunters, what Taotha demonstrated was how our relationship was. He knew that he was so talented at hunting, but there was also an older tradition that, you could take the life of that moose during a contest to prove how strong and how smart you are. But instead of doing that, he followed an older tradition of value, which is that the ability as a hunter to sneak up to an animal who spends his whole life listening for bears or cougars or foxes or wolves that are going to capture him every morning, today, tomorrow, yesterday. That moose is very, very talented, can smell for miles away, can hear mountains away. And for Taotha to be able to get that close and not take the life of that moose, but to take that patch of fur to demonstrate that that's how we are, especially for a contest. All the people, right then and there knew that he was the talented one, and that he proved not only was he a strong hunter, but that he followed the older traditions. And so that's a story that I share with you guys about how the Stoney Nakoda people won the traditional hunting territories in the Banff Canmore area with other nations. That film that we shared there, I had a good time making that film, and it was the first time me and my brother ever did something like that. And like I said in that film, that I really look forward to the art and the craft that comes from these animals, like the buffalo, who taught us how to make clothing from his hide, how to make drums, how to make knife cases, rifle cases, saddles to utilize. That's what I really enjoy and what I look for. And so for me, I have a few items here, and I mentioned it, a parfletch, and this is one of the parfletches that I recently made from a deer, and we paint them with designs, and this is what, you know, we open up, and I just have some garbage bags in there to make it look like it's full, but we store medicines and tonneau and meat in there. And there's a story about how the parfletch came to our people that maybe I'll share another time. But also I have on my other side here, my headband. As I'm a dancer, like I said, I wear this on my head when I dance at a powwow. And these are porcupine quills that I got. And behind, you know, I have some buckskin that came from a deer. And right here, as well as porcupine quills. And behind it is actually hide from a deer as well. And we have some beadwork and more porcupine quills. And that's what me and my wife actually made this for me. And I did the porcupine quill work. But when we do this artwork, and how it connects us to land, is that we're honoring these animals by what they taught us. They're the teachers. And the land, you know, where to find certain wood to make these hides, how to learn to live on the land naturally is what these animals give to us. And today, and I said this morning in another meeting, that this is how we communicate with the land and the animals today, is by our artwork. We honor them. And as we're making these pieces of art, we're thinking about, you know, the people that taught us how to make these. We're thinking about where this porcupine came from, where the deer used to live. We're thinking about where I am currently at that spot. You know, I'm at my house, and outside, you know, there's the land. There's, you know, there's some porcupines that might live just behind my house here. And I know there's a family of deer that come through here quite a bit. And I'm thinking about them and my environment. And it connects me to that land on a really, really deep level. And we call that medicine. We call that healing, because we're realizing the places that we're at. And when you hear stories like what I mentioned today with, you know, how we won our hunting rights, really deepen that connection as well. I'm thinking about that story as I'm making, you know, these artwork, as I'm thinking that, oh, my ancestors made these, you know, so many years ago, and here I am still doing the same thing. And I think about all of my ancestors that came before me and how talented they were and what they used to do and how they used to make it. And this is so a deep connection that we have, and that's our relationship with the land. And it's really, really important to us. Many of us would say it's sacred, and it's really, really a part of our lives that we cherish so much, because it does connect us to the land. And again, like I said, that's our language today with the animal nation and the natural environment, the mountains, the trees, the birds, the water, even the dirt and the smallest pebbles that are out there. And so I know that was a lot for you guys to grasp onto, but you know, those of you who have been to a powwow before, you'll see lots of dancers. Even in this photo here, you see my ancestors wearing eagle headdresses. They're wearing beadwork, and they're representing and being proud of who they are and where they come from. Every little piece of that regalia has a meaning. And so some people might say these are costumes, but after you hear the stories, after you find out where they come from, little bits and pieces of these regalias, that they're not costumes, they really have a deep meaning and connect us to our environment and to our land. And so with that, I leave that with you guys and say shnish and thank you for being here and coming with your students and your teacher, and also the film. You can ask me about that as well. I always enjoy sharing that film and hearing questions and comments. So I'll conclude my presentation there and hand it back over to Mallory. Shnish.
Ishnish, Daryl, every time I hear you speak, I'm learning constantly. So thank you so much for sharing. Alex, I'll just get you to throw on the question slide. This is your opportunity to ask Daryl a question or comment. Daryl shared at our board of directors meeting this morning that this is not just an opportunity to ask questions, you can also comment.
We just got a question here from Adam Rob. Daryl is just asking about where the film was shot.
Yeah, that's one of our special hidden locations just right off the Trans-Canada Highway. It's just over the hill here, in between my hill that we say Bear Hill, where I live. When I say mine, I mean the Stoney Nakoda Nation, but it's known as Scott Lake Hill. And the Petro-Canada in between Morley and Calgary. It's in between Scott Lake Hill and the Petro-Canada, kind of in the Sibbald area. And it's a small piece of our reservation that we have that's there. And that's kind of the place where elk are really, it's a place they go to every year to do their rutting. And so it's a really special place for us, but it's really small. And so you can walk it in like a few hours, maybe less. Yeah.
There's another question from Robert Thirst. You talked about the idea of connection to the land, having healing powers. Can you speak more to that idea?
Yeah, I could definitely, shed some light on that one. And these healing powers, you call them powers, but really they're just, their feelings, their energy that, and even, all of you that are here today, you're attracted to mountains at some degree, you're attracted to the land, that's what brings you here. And that's that medicine that we're talking about. That's that healing, because those of you that are here that have gone outdoors, to rock climb, even just cross-country skiing, snowboarding, skiing on a mountain, there's joy and happiness and excitement that you get from doing that. I know that's how it is for me. And that's what that healing is. And there's people in our community who know how to facilitate, know how to work with that. And they know how to, especially with artifacts that we make that are gifted by the creator, we say, that have the ability to really, have, the idea of healing powers, but it's very rare. And those people that do have them are very, very special. And so special that they won't even acknowledge that they have those powers, because just like Taotha in that story, he was humble and he didn't want to show all of his skills because it meant taking a life, that he did it in another way. And so I hope that kind of helps bring a little bit more light on that question.
So there's another question in the chat from Cochrane. Students are wondering about how the receiving of a name takes place and how many names someone can have.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's many ways that you can receive a name. Primarily, it's from an elder within the community. And he also has, this ability to, without knowing an individual for a long period of time, especially as a young child, they go through a process of ceremony where they ask the land, they ask the creator, they ask the animal nation what name is appropriate for this individual. And through ceremony, they're answered, their question is answered through a unique way that I'm not even too sure, how it comes, because it's that special and sacred. And then it'll come through. And so my daughter, my father-in-law was the one that gave her name, and her name is in CRYN, and I can't say it, I'm still learning it, but hers is Old Queen Bear. And that name was given to her not long after she was born. And watching her, because she's going to be 6 this year, she definitely has like a really old lady, vibe, where she's in demand with that bear. She's just like, doesn't take no for an answer. And she really has that kind of bear, I'm the boss kind of mentality, like an old, older lady that knows she has, control over her husband. And you're allowed, a long time ago, before Europeans came to the land, we would have, you usually would get 4 names: one when you're a baby, you're a teen, you're adult, and when you're an elder. Today, people only get 1, 2, but usually it was the 4th, and you can even give away your name. You didn't have 4 at one time. You usually would have, 2 or 1, because you're giving away your name. There's a warrior in our tribes of the Lakota, Nakota, and Dakota named Crazy Horse, who's very famous. His name Crazy Horse was given to him by his father, and his father transferred that name to him, and his father took on another name called Worm, which is a worm that's in the dirt. And so those are kind of how many names you could have and how we kind of receive them.
And so we have one more question, and then we will have to wrap the questions up. But feel free, if you have a question that was not answered, email myself and I can bring those questions to Daryl, and maybe he can help to illuminate them in the next presentation at the next workshop. So the last question is, do you have any advice for youth in the city who want to rediscover or discover their Indigenous roots? From Adam Robb.
Yeah, my advice is don't be afraid to reach out to your roots, and even don't be afraid to say that you don't know enough and you want to know. I think that's what being a warrior is all about today. Is it's not about having lots of strength and knowledge, but it's about how to be kind and gentle, and how to make yourself, we say, like, belittling yourself to feel like you're someone small that has so much to learn. And when you honor and acknowledge that you want to learn more, a lot of elders love hearing that and they want to share. And so my advice is don't be afraid to reach out to your community. And those of you that are non-Indigenous, it's good to reach out to Indigenous people in your school, students, teachers. There's lots of programs in the city that have, ways to connect you directly for both those of you that don't want to rediscover your Indigenous roots and those that are not Indigenous. That's what's good about the city, is they have good programs that bring a lot of us together. Thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. Ishnish. I'm still learning. Thank you for helping me on my journey. So driving from the Canadian Rockies, yeah, perfect. I'm driving from the Canadian Rockies from Calgary. We'll take you through the Stoney Nakoda Nation with Yamnuska on the right to greet you. So whenever I'm driving home to the Canadian Rockies, these 2 things represent home to me. Our next speaker is Cheyenne Bearspaw, and she is the artist behind our new Canadian Rockies Youth Network Mountainscape logo of Yamnuska. Cheyenne is a 26-year-old Stoney Nakoda artist who grew up on the Stoney Nakoda Nation, and she has been an artist with the Stoney Nakoda AV Club since 2019. Since she was a kid, she always took an interest in art. Today, her primary artistic mediums are tattoo work, acrylic, dot work, and pen. And this year, Cheyenne is also part of an exciting artist project, the Canadian Rockies Repeat Film. This is an artist group who are doing plain art painting at locations around Banff that settler Catherine White visited in the early 1900s. The project is documenting how the Canadian Rockies landscape and glaciers are changing due to development and climate change through art. As a cultural practitioner, Cheyenne also uses hand poke techniques in traditional tattoos, and to her, tattoos are a symbol of resistance from oppression Indigenous people have faced. Cheyenne, if you'd like to share your video and share your artist statement of why you chose to draw Mount Yamnuska. You'll have to unmute yourself. Oh, there. Hi. And yeah, hi.
Hi. How's everyone? So, I am Cheyenne OziNja. I am a self-taught artist and cultural tattoo practitioner, and I had completed Earthline Tattoo residency back in 2019. And yeah, I like to say I'm like an artist of many faces and whatnot. I really love acrylic tattoos, so I brought some of my acrylic painting. So I brought some of my landscape that this is currently with Rockies Repeat. And I'm also very, very tattoo influenced. So I like to design my work as something you'll see in a tattoo shop. And of course, the logo that I have right now is YAMAYETha. And I really like to do dot work. And this is my cat. His name's Lily. You can hear him in the background, I'm sorry. And yeah, I've been an artist since as I was a child. I used to just start my art with a ballpoint pen and lined pieces of paper until like my last year of high school. I started teaching myself acrylic painting. I also make regalia and moccasins. I do beadwork, and being a part of the Nakota AV Club, I am a storyteller as well. I help film. I help take photography work and also acting. And yeah, I'm happy to be a part of this. I'm happy to be a part of this project, and thank you guys for having me.
Ishnish, Cheyenne, thank you so much. We're so honored that Cheyenne wanted to create our logo. And this is her first logo. And she told me that she chose Yamnuska because it's home. I grew up with it. I see it every day. And it's a beautiful spot. Yamnuska means flat-faced, and you can see right down. You can see everything from up there, the mountains and the foothills and the plains. And even outsiders who are not born here climb, hike, and come here to experience the land. Yamnuska is a symbol of my home and others experiencing it. Thank you, Cheyenne. Thank you for sharing your gifts. Ishnish, Yamnuska is a symbol now of the network sense of place in the Canadian Rockies too. It is a meeting of the foothills and the mountains. And so now another time to introduce another inspiring youth, the founder of the Canadian Rockies Youth Summit, Ben Green. Ben Green is a grade 12 student at Calgary's Central Memorial High School and the founder of the Canadian Rockies Youth Summit, heralded by the ACC as the new voice in conservation in the Canadian Rockies. Ben is a part of an amazing team of 6 youth I'm working with who are planning this year's summit. And when he's not doing outreach, making the summit possible this year, he's teaching at Mount Norquay as a ski instructor and spending time in the mountains. I'll put the floor over to Mike. If Andrew or Alex can pin his video, that would be fabulous.
There we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'll take my mask off there. Yeah, I am Ben Green. Some of you may know me. I've probably met with a couple of you before. I'm wearing my pajamas right now. You might have seen that with Lucas too. It's pajama day at my school. So yeah, so I'm just really excited for this semester of the Canadian Rockies Youth Network to begin. And while it's really unfortunate we can't be meeting together face to face, we should still recognize the benefits that online learning has. Sorry, Alex. We have a larger audience of youth who are able to come visit the summit. So we're able to kind of expand the youth voice, and we're getting more resources that allow us to do that with online. So this year, our focus of the network and programs is going to be turning inspiration into action. We're going to use our voices to advocate for the real life consultation of youth. If I may kind of look at the global picture in terms of youth involvement, the last handful of years, we've seen some of the most impactful years for youth wanting to share their voices. We've seen the likes of Greta Thunberg and Autumn Pelche, who have kind of become these global celebrities. And we've seen the frustration of our generation accumulate in an increased amount of advocacy and engagement from youth. my experience with policy kind of reflected this frustration. I began this project in 2018, me being the ski bum that I am. I wanted to get involved with the Lake Louise ski area expansion. It struck me as an important issue because it intersected with many parts of my life: tourism, business, but also the environment and wildlife. After working my whole first semester of high school on this project, I never even got one email acknowledging my presence as a youth in conservation. So that's when I kind of started to recognize the problem. Political decisions in Canada are made in a 4-year basis or a 4-year cycle. That's how our democracy works. So our leaders, we vote on our leaders and they rank our issues from high to low, depending on their views. Now, the problem with this system is that because of the 4-year cycle, all our decisions are made 4 years into the future. And because of how voting works, youth aren't allowed to vote. So youth are often left out and ignored. As I've been taught in my work in environmental advocacy, we should be making our decisions using the 7th generation principle. It comes from the Iroquois Confederacy. And how it works is that we should consider what works best for our generation, but it's just as equally important to consider what works best for the 7 generations ahead of us. It makes sense because when we're making our important decisions, we should think of the future implications it has and the people it's going to affect. And that's something I feel that's really lost right now in our decision-making system. If I may relate this all back to the global scene that I talked about earlier, where we're seeing more youth advocacy, I've really started to question whether youth are actually being listened to, or if we're just being put on a stage without an actual audience that's listening to us. While it's great youth are being educated and involved, while it's great youth are being educated and involved, are we actually being viewed as a meaningful body of consultation? Are people actually taking our voices into consideration? My answer to this would be somewhat. Many organizations are starting to recognize the importance of the youth voice and why they should include us, but there's no infrastructure yet to include the youth voice. Nobody's used to getting the youth input. So what's the best way to share the youth voice? I would argue by creating our own action. So coming back to where we are with the Canadian Rockies Youth Network, we've been given this chance to meaningfully engage with these issues of conservation. The best way to share our voices is through action right now. And so during our meetings and workshops, I'd just like you all to notice your interests, notice the issues you understand and the ones you connect with the most. And eventually these interests will hopefully turn into some sort of action. That's just like how my interest in skiing turned into this event. To be the most successful in the next months, I want all the students and youth here to use the strength of being a youth. Share your unique voice with the rest of the world and make sure to critique society and offer creative solutions that adults may not have noticed. That's really the strength of our generation, and the function of all new generations is that we kind of provide that new perspective that's very important for the development of society. So yeah, by creating your own action this year, we're going to show the value of our voice and we're going to be heard. So thank you so much for listening to me talk. I'll pass it on now. I'll pass the Zoom on to Mallory.
So thank you, Ben. That's I find Ben's story so inspiring because he found that there wasn't space for him at the table, so he made his own table. And what he said was really profound. The summit theme is action, and that is the ultimate goal of the Canadian Rockies Youth Network. Is we want to provide structure for creating action projects in your community and creating ideas and ways that you can partner with them, different organizations and different partners and different mentors. So from storytelling to art to youth activism and now animals, this brings us to our final presenter, John Wilmshurst. Next slide. John Wilmshurst is over 5 decades old. He was born in the 60s, played in the woods in the 70s. The 80s was rock and roll, universities in the 90s, started a family and settled in the mountains in 2000s. And for most of that, He was interested in wildlife and conservation. He has a PhD, he's a PhD wildlife biologist and a provocative science writer. He believes science is about curiosity, and he definitely has a youthful spirit. During his school years, he focused on zoology, animals big and large, and he studied critters like mice, bears, elk, wood rats, wildebeest, zebra, caribou, mountain goats, and he's had a chance to work all over Canada, Central America, Africa, and Europe. These days, he lives in Jasper and works as the program coordinator at the Foothills Research Institute, a forestry research institute. And since animals do not have a voice, John will be here to give us a sense of place for the animals in the Canadian Rockies. And somebody just asked a question about the white bark pine. So I asked presenters to create a photo that speaks to their sense of place and what to them represents the Canadian Rockies. And John chose the white bark pine. I'll let him speak more to that in the Q&A or during his presentation.
Okay, well, thanks, Mallory, for the introduction. Thanks, Ben, for making this all happen again this year. It was really excited to work with you guys last year. I'm going to focus on the notion of sense of place. And I got about 10 minutes to talk, so I'm going to be moving pretty quick. But I hope the themes are pretty consistent with what Daryl talked about and what Cheyenne talked about a little bit, with a mind for wildlife. And the argument I'm going to make here today is that wildlife really do have a very strong sense of place, but that it's pretty complicated. And a lot of times that place that they are attracted to is a place that we would consider empty. Let's see how this works. Oh, there we go. Okay, so wildlife all over the world have a really, really different sense of what a home is. And I'm going to be using the word home and place and space kind of interchangeably here. So up on the top left up here is a herd of wildebeest. This is in Serengeti National Park. These animals are migratory. They move hundreds of kilometers every year from one country. They move from Kenya into Tanzania and back. There's a million of these bad boys out there, and yet the area that they occupy is often just totally vacant of any wildlife because it's desert-like. And so their sense of place, their sense of home is vast, but it is not about a particular space like a spot or an ecosystem, but it's about what their biological needs are, whether they need to give birth or whether they need to eat or whether they need to escape their predators. So their sense of place is a little bit different than what we may think, and it's often empty. And these guys here, this is the monarch butterfly. They put the wildebeest to shame because they migrate over tens of thousands of kilometers every year intergenerationally to return to sometimes the same tree. An incredible story. And if you don't know anything about the migration of the monarch butterfly, you should learn about it because it's pretty phenomenal. And their sense of place is very acute. And destruction of a single tree could actually lead to this entire species or a big part of it going extinct. They need a very, very precise home in order to survive. But look at these guys. This is a gopher. We call them gophers. They're actually called a Richardson's ground squirrel officially. And they spend their entire life in a few square meters. They have a hole that's really identifiable. They're born in there, they're raised in there, they grow up in there, and they start their own families in there. Sometimes the males run away and disperse, go to another place, but largely their sense of place is very identifiable. They spend their entire life in that one spot. Very different than what we see with wildebeest and with monarch butterflies. But let's bring it back to the Rocky Mountains. That's our theme. I want to talk about a couple of iconic species from the Rocky Mountains. So today I'm going to focus on these guys up here, the woodland caribou. There's a special type of caribou that live in the Rocky Mountains called the mountain caribou, ironically. There's several types of mountain caribou. What you find in this area is the southern mountain caribou. And then, of course, the mountain goat down here. Many of you visited the mountains might have seen these guys. Very, very special animal. They have a very similar but interestingly different sense of place and how they use empty space, and keep that in mind as I talk about them. Okay, let's start with the mountain goat. Mountain goats need cliffs. They'll spend their entire life within about 250 meters of near vertical cliffs. and they venture only away from those cliffs, only really to feed, like these two goats here are doing. That need for cliffs is because of these guys. They're predators, cougars, wolves, bears, that find them pretty easy pickings when they're away from the cliffs. And so since the predators won't go on to the rocks, they can find refuge there. The trick is this, and I'm going to show you this map. This is from a master's thesis that was done back in 2012. And in the squares here are the ranges, the rough ranges of some goat populations in the Rockies. The little dots, the colored dots, are some location data for individual goats. And what you'll see is that there's all this huge area here, which is all goat habitat, but the goats are spending most of their time in these little tiny spots of it. The trick is this: when a predator, like a cougar, finds a goat population and learns where they eat, it can just feast on them, because the goats are defenseless when they're foraging. There's no food up here for them. They need to eat. They have to come out here to find food. And so what happens is the goats say, uh-oh, we can't live with this predator. We got to move. And so they go from, say, point A here to point B, or somewhere in between. They'll find a spot that was previously empty, and they'll occupy it. It'll become their new home. And it has to have the same characteristics of steep cliffs with food nearby, but it basically has to be an empty spot for them. And that's a really challenging thing, because they might never have to do that in their entire life. They could live 15 years and spend the whole time without the predators ever finding them. So for goats to survive in the Rocky Mountains, there has to be available cliffs that may never, ever in our lifetimes be occupied by goats, which is a really difficult concept for people. And in fact, we see this all the time. So we build roads through goat habitat. Goats have this really special need for salt. And so they have mineral licks where they visit many times a month. And we often will mine these mineral licks for the minerals that are in there themselves and take that away from goats. So we'll build highways between the mineral lick and where their home is, making it impossible for them to access it. No more funny. And somebody's unmuted. And then we do stuff like this. This is the Glacier Discovery Walk, Glacier Skywalk, I think they call it now, in Jasper. And this is a goat cliff. There was a goat population there, but a company in Jasper decided that this would be a really good tourist trap. They built a glass walkway there as an attraction. And so now people walk out onto this glass walkway after paying the money to do so. And now no more goats live on this cliff. That goat population still exists, but they can't use this cliff anymore because they don't want to be around the people. So their home has become smaller and more dangerous, because now if the cliff that they're living on now is discovered by, say, a cougar, they don't have the option to move here. Their sense of place, their sense of home has shrunken. Let's move on to caribou. Okay, I talked about southern mountain caribou. These are a subspecies of woodland caribou. They live exclusively in the mountains, and they have the same kind of problem that goats do. They have lots of predators. They're pretty tasty animals to eat. They have wolves, bears, cougars eat these guys as well. They have different habitat requirements in the wintertime, and what their preference is to go to spots where the snow is so deep that an animal like a wolf or a cougar cannot reach them. They just simply cannot go through the same sort of terrain. Caribou have very, very big hooves that allow them to float over the snow and run like crazy through this really deep snow like these animals here are doing. And that's something that wolves and cougars can't do in the wintertime. And that protects the caribou from the predators. It gives them a spot where they can find their food, hang out together, and be safe from predators in the winter. This is a map here of the various populations of caribou in Jasper National Park, where I'm talking to you from. There's 4 populations: the Alopesh herd, the Tonquin herd, the Moline herd, and the Brazeau herd. There's not very many animals in these herds, but there's an enormous space. This black outline here is all of Jasper National Park. It's 11,000 square kilometers. Whoops, I knew I was going to do that. 11,000 square kilometers. In the Tonquin herd, there's only about 25 to 30 animals left in this herd. There's a huge area. And all of these little dark spots, if you can see that on your screen, are the places where caribou can be found. So they use the whole area, but it's only like 25 animals. So it's not exactly a lot of constant space use. Most of their home, most of their sense of place is in fact the places where they're not. the empty spots in their world. And what do we do as humans? Well, we love, and Ben was talking about skiing. This is what happens. So you go up into the Alpine in the wintertime, say like this skier here by Moline Lake in Jasper, Bald Hills area, and you say, wow, there's nothing here. Let's go skiing. No damage done. There's no wildlife here. I'm not displacing anything. It's all fine. But look at this ski track here from the photo on the bottom right-hand side. Those skiers are compacting that trail, and what happens is wolves find that trail, and it gives them a highway to get into caribou habitat in the winter, making the caribou less safe, like the goats, and making this no longer caribou habitat. So this is not an option for them. If wolves if they were trying to escape from a predator or in search for new food, a new spot to have their babies or something like that, they couldn't go here because the wolves would find them and kill them. And so even though these people are enjoying a winter recreational activity, their sense that that place is empty and that they're enjoying that empty space is actually counterproductive for the caribou. I want to talk a little bit about critical habitat because it is what scientists and what the government calls a sense of place. Now, I got to do something here. I want to change up my screen. Can you see the shift now to the Canada Gazette? You're seeing that on your screen, Mallory? Yeah, okay. So this is the official definition of a sense of place for caribou. I'm not going to read this. I'm just going to scroll through and show you. This is in French and English. We're on page 4, page 5. This is describing a sense of place for caribou. We're down to the signature pages, some little more information, page 12, page 14, 15. So we've got almost there, got 21 pages of science describing the sense of place for caribou. And this is important. You know, it's important that we do that we understand what it is from a scientific perspective. But the reality is it's much more than that. And what this document does not describe is the empty spaces that those animals need. The fact that they need more than what you can sort of see on the ground. They need something that you can feel, what they can feel, where they can feel safe, and that's very difficult to describe. And it leads me, I'm gonna have to go for, hang on a sec, this again, hang on. Slideshow. There we go. It means that there's a lot of work left for us to do. It's more about understanding what a caribou or what a goat or what any animal needs in its life in terms of its sort of physical sense, but it's understanding what a sense of place is for wildlife. And there's my message really to you, especially in a youth summit, is that as a scientist, you know, often people hold scientists up as being, we're the ones that know everything. We understand the world, and if only people would listen to us, then the world might be a better place. The reality is that we know very little about our world, and science is not about knowledge, it's about discovery. And I'm here to tell you that there's actually a lot of work to do if we're going to get maintain populations of caribou and goats in the Rocky Mountains, in this space that we all cherish, into the future. We have to be able to answer questions like, what do we do now if it takes decades for places, critical habitat, to recover? So what happens if the company that owns the Glacier Discovery Walk decides, oh, we don't want that anymore, and they tear it down? What are we going to do with that cliff now that it's been destroyed for goats? What are we going to do if we decide that we don't want Lake Louise to be there anymore because it's critical goat habitat? How long will we be able to tolerate that being empty and having no goats if it's going to be returned to goat habitat? How do we recognize and protect vacant animal habitat? That's really a difficult thing to do, and we don't know how to do that yet. We're going to leave that up to you to do. And how do we get people to respect a sense of place that they don't share? And this is something that's really important, because I think a lot of the people here who are here at this conference, at this workshop, have a sense of, and we heard about this from Daryl, have a real connection to this place, but there's many more people out there that don't. And how do we get those people on board to understand that there's an importance to this place for people and for wildlife, and that there's ways to share that world? I'm going to end talking about the grizzly bear. It's one of my favorite stories. So when you ask the question, when, you know, if I could ask everybody to raise their hand, what's the habitat of the grizzly bear? I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would say it's the mountains, the Rocky Mountains. Actually, the grizzly bear is a prairie species. If you drive out, a lot of you folks living on the prairies right now, if you drive around, you'll see that there's not a lot of grizzly bear habitat left in the prairies. It's all been converted to agriculture, more or less. The grizzly bears were abundant there. They fed on all the wildlife that was there, the bison, the elk, the pronghorn antelope, the deer, all of that. And but that habitat was taken away from them. So where they are living is now their kind of last refuge, a place that they don't really want to be, but they are here. They don't have a choice. Now, luckily, the grizzly bear is a pretty adaptable animal. Goats and caribou are not. So while the goat and the caribou will likely disappear from view if we don't honor their sense of place, the grizzly bear is lucky. It has found a new home, made a new home for itself in the Rockies. And that's the message, is that what we perceive to be a sense of place for animals is not always what it is, and it's complicated, but it's important. And that's my last slide. Happy to take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Alex, if you can just go back to the slideshow and feel free to start typing in the chat. We won't have a lot of time for questions, but if you do have a question, you can also email me and I will try my best to get a hold of John. He's a busy man, and get back to you. So this is your opportunity for any comments, and teachers will also get John to share those questions that he asked at the end of the presentation, and perhaps you'll be able to have a class discussion and further answer them.
That'd be great.
That would be great to share. So we don't have any questions coming in quite yet. If you wanted to comment, feel free to put your hand up and unmute yourself. Tim Van Cleek says, thank you for the information. As an avid backcountry skier, I'm ashamed to know that I didn't know about the wolf highways. Is there more information available to find areas that are sensitive?
Yeah, there's a lot of ski clubs. In fact, the Alpine Club of Canada is very knowledgeable about caribou habitat needs in the wintertime. And so they've actually voluntarily stopped booking some of their huts in caribou habitat. And so you can consult with them if you're a member of that group. There's lots of information if you Google mountain caribou about their habitat and what areas are protected. Interestingly enough, snowmobile groups are really involved in finding areas where they can recreate without having impacts on caribou. And so there are lots of resources out there. It's just a matter of just searching around. And if you really want to get into the weeds of it, you can contact me through Mallory, and I can help you find some resources.
Students are also wondering how caribou escape wolves in the summer.
They don't.
That's from CRYN.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, for them, it is having a refuge for part of the year, a critical part of the year. They do go to areas that we would consider remote, but there's nothing really remote in the summer from caribou or from wolves. And so their strategy is very much to just to try to do their best in the winter time, and to go to spaces that are so inhospitable to any other predator that they can't reach them. And in the summertime, just stay on the move. So it's a difficult row for caribou, and that's why they're a species at risk right now, is because they've never been particularly abundant because of that life history strategy. But we're just making it worse for them by making their homes smaller.
So we have a couple more questions. We won't have time to answer them all. So Adam, I'm going to take one of your questions. In general, are most of the big species in the Canadian Rockies nomadic, or do they stay in the same space?
It is no, like species like goats they can move around if they're forced to, but they prefer not to. Sheep also don't move if they don't have to. Moose tend to stay in place. So the major ones that you'll see that are migratory or nomadic are elk and caribou.
And the two other questions, which it may be we're going to turn this to the youth maybe, or create some sort of a follow-up assignment with these two questions. But if we had an opportunity to return some of the land to wildlife, how would we do that? And Also, how can you convince people that empty spaces still have wildlife? And I think that this would be a great thing to kind of inspire some class discussion with, but John, I'll let you kind of answer those two questions briefly.
I can't. The second question I can't answer. I mean, honestly, I put it up there because we don't know the answer to it, and often it's a political thing. I mean, some protected areas like national parks and provincial parks, they help, don't they? Because it gives us control over that landscape. You can't, you know, it provides a degree of protection so long as the government is inspired to maintain that protection. But but it's such a challenging thing because everybody has different attitudes around what is acceptable use, what's important in their life for recreation, what damage and destruction is defined as. So yeah, I can't answer that question, and that's why I put it out there for you guys, because it's important to be able to think about these things explicitly, work on them in our communities, and come up with solutions that I don't have right now.
Okay, well, thank you so much, John. I love how thought-provoking your presentation was, and how you shared how that profound connection that species share, but it's maybe not exactly like ours. And you also illustrated how there are many ways of knowing. There's so many unique species that exist in the Canadian Rockies: mountain goats, monarch butterflies, the endangered mountain caribou. So thank you for giving us a little bit of information and just brushing the surface. Adam Robb says, John for Prime Minister.
Yeah, I don't have the right hair for the Prime Minister, man. I'm sorry.
So I hope that by participating in this workshop, you understand a little bit more about why the Canadian Rockies inspires such an incredible sense of place for not only the Indigenous people but also the animals. So there are some undeniably amazing facts, which are not always fun facts, but the Canadian Rockies are an iconic world-renowned park system, a World Heritage Site, and set like many national parks, have a rich Indigenous history, the headwaters of over 4 major river systems. And these mountain towns, Banff, Canmore, Jasper, are often looked to as leaders on environmental issues. Next slide, please. Now the Canadian Rockies, oh, back it up. The Canadian Rockies is our home. It's home to wildlife. It's home to the Stoney Nakoda people, home to the Biosphere Institute, and home to the Canadian Rockies Youth Summit. It wows, inspires, creates awe with the glaciers, rich history, thermal hot springs. And we think that when people care about the land and have a connection to the land, they want to take care of it and be stewards of it. So we hope that you've been inspired to be stewards of the Canadian Rockies landscape. Alex has added the link to the website if you want to join the Canadian Rockies Youth Network, if you haven't already done so, and teachers can sign up in that way. Next slide, please. So why should you care about the Canadian Rockies? Well, in ending, we just kind of want to ask you, like, what inspires a sense of place for you in the Canadian Rockies? For Ben, it was that view of Mount Norquay where he grew up skiing, and he loves how the town of Banff development contracts with the rest of the valley and its framing within the valley. For Daryl, it's the image of the Nakota chiefs, including his grandfather on horseback in front of a mountain. For Cheyenne, Yamnuska, a mountain that you can see from her home. For John, it's the white bark pine, a resilient endangered species that grows like a mangled, almost dead looking tree at high elevations, giving stability and providing erosion to slopes, and also providing nuts for bears. So now take a second. What inspires you? Is it the glacial blue waters that fill those lakes? And also are the headwaters and the water towers of our drinking water? Is it the snow-peaked mountains that you ski on? Next slide. Just take a second and imagine. Is it traveling out onto a receding glacier as a kid? Next slide. Is it walking down Banff Avenue and seeing that iconic picture of Cascade while you lick ice cream? Next slide. Is it seeing your first bear? Next slide. So just take a second, think about it, and we want you to share with us why you feel a connection to the Canadian Rockies landscape. Why do you value it? Feel free to share your response on our social media platforms. We have Instagram, Twitter, and our Facebook page, and we'll provide all the links in the chat as well and share them with the teachers, or feel free to email them to me. We really want the network to be about youth sharing what and creating consensus on what they believe is of value in the Canadian Rockies and what is worth preserving and conserving. So in following up, I am just going to move to the next slide. So share that with us on all of those links. The links are in the chat box. Next slide. Thank you. Ishnish. Okay, I guess that slide is not correct. So I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for attending this workshop. I know a lot of you may have to go, so if you missed the end of the workshop, this is going to be posted and recorded. Thank you to our presenters, Daryl Kootenay, Cheyenne Bearspaw, Ben Green, and John Wilmshurst. And also thank you to the Calgary Foundation and the Youth Summit for making this possible. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or email myself. And the next workshop will be on March 25th at the same time, same place on Zoom. So just drop me a line to sign up for that workshop, or I'll have a form if you want to sign up for the whole series. Thank you so much to everybody.